Hey, it's Julie from StoryADay, and I've just spent a couple of very pleasant hours staring at the sun, watching the moon transit in front of it. Yes, I had my eclipse glasses, don't worry. But some days we get to make those kinds of choices. Are we going to write, or are we going to do something that isn't writing, but is maybe writing adjacent? Maybe I'll need, like Mark Twain, to write about a um, solar eclipse one day. So, how do we write when there really isn't that much time in any given day or life? Sometimes it's wonderful. You get that chance to really have a 90-minute block, 2-hour block of time where you can really get your teeth into some writing and some, real creative thinking. And that's a fabulous thing. And we all want that. We don't actually need that for every type of writing. Sometimes you can write in the gaps between other things. For example, I wrote in a 15-minute gap between me doing one thing and the start of the solar eclipse. I set my timer, I sat down to write. How do you actually do that? Well, it helps to have very defined tasks and to have done some of the thinking up front. Now, here are some other ways that you can maximize your productivity if you know you're going to only have some gaps in your life to write in. You don't have to give up on the idea of having nice, big, long, comfy sessions to write, but sometimes you can get a lot done by using these gaps. So first thing is, if you have an ongoing project, it's a lot easier to start writing when you only have a 15-minute window because you've done a lot of thinking about the thing. So you know you've got to write the next scene or the next interaction between your characters. Grab 15 minutes when you're eating your lunch and you could be scrolling mindlessly on social media. Maybe you can write there. One of the other things, certainly during the StoryADay challenge in May, that's one of the things I really recommend to people, to read the prompts as early in the day as possible to get your creative juices going, and then use those gaps during the day to actually do the writing. Another thing that's really helpful when you're trying to write in the gaps is to think about what tools you're using. Now, I have my fancy fountain pen and my favorite notebook, and I love to write with those. I have Scrivener, which I keep on my laptop, and I don't really want to trust multi-platform with that. So if I'm writing in the gaps, I'm very likely to use something like a notebook that I always have in my bag and a cheapo pen, or Google Docs, which is great for being everywhere. And, if you use Word and you're using their OneDrive, that might be the same thing for you. So don't need to be snobby about the tools you use. You want to use a tool that's going to create the least friction between you and your writing. So when you're drafting new things, something like Google Docs can be great. When you're trying to revise and organize, you might want to transfer all that stuff into a program like Scrivener that's easier to work with. For something like the StoryADay Challenge, don't recommend that you decide to learn a new software package right when you're also trying to be your maximally creative self. So if you know you're in a period where you can only write in the gaps, use familiar tools, use tools that are everywhere, use anything that minimizes the friction between you and the act of writing. Another trick for writing in the gaps is to recycle. Now, you can call this stealing, you can call it repurposing, but you can steal from your own stories. You can rewrite a story that you've written before in a different way and learn something about the new perspective, the new characters, the new point of view, voice, and writing it in a different tense. Or you can write things that come from your work in progress, but you're just going to write this tiny little snippet of it. Or you're going to write a short story that is backstory for a character who doesn't get a lot of time in your novel. All of these things are writing. They're all things that develop your skills as a writer, and they can be very satisfying as well as great practice for your writing craft. Another thing that you can do if you know you're in a season where you're going to be writing in the gaps is to time yourself and figure out realistically how much you can get done in 15 minutes, half an hour, 10 minutes. So when you're writing and things are going well, just for a week or so, Start a timer when you sit down and see realistically, and it's not about judgment, it's about collecting data. So realistically, from the moment you sit down at your desk to the moment your writing session is over, say you've got half an hour, how much did you get done? How many words did you get written? Sometimes that might be 100, but you've got a great idea for a story you can come back to later. Sometimes you might be flying and get 500, 600 words written in that half hour. Usually if you've done all your thinking beforehand, but like timing yourself and knowing your stats means that you can realistically plan for those gaps when you're writing in the gaps. Don't expect to get a full story written if you've only got two 15-minute gaps, unless you're going to decide to write a very small scale story or recycle one of your previous plots or somebody else's plot, or, you know, write a fan fiction. Be realistic, but being realistic means you need data. So time yourself and be aware of the stats. How long does it take you to write a particular thing on average? And that's why I'm saying test it out over a week, test it out over 2 weeks. Time yourself, gather some stats so that you can make realistic plans and you won't be too hard on yourself and disappointed in yourself. So there are some of my tips for writing in the gaps when you don't have an awful lot of time, but you're determined to make time for your writing. Hope that's been helpful. If you haven't signed up for StoryADay May yet, come and join us. StoryADay.org/sign up. I'll send you the Keep Writing workbook, which will help you get your head in the right place for the challenge and act as a tool you can use during the challenge to remind yourself of why you started this crazy thing in the first place and get you excited about writing again. Come over to StoryADay.org/sign up, like, subscribe, hit the bell, do the things. You know how YouTube works. Hope that's helpful, and most of all, keep writing.